May I recommend, I'd like to do some overhead. Most of my presentation is overhead. And because I'd like all of us to see, if I could just ask some of us to move forward. And by chance, I think you can see it from here, but the one on the side I'd like to move. There's some overhead I'd like to show you because a lot of what I want to say is very visual. And I think at this point, you know, where we are and the speakers that came before me, I was sitting there listening and there were so many answers that I was getting as it relates to modern day by looking at what happened during the ancient time. I'm a New York City Board of Education teacher. I recently graduated. Some people call it retirement. I call it graduation because now I can do what I was born to do. You know, the Kemetic priesthood, it took 40 years to go through school. And I figured that the years I've spent with our children, 31 years and 3 months and 15 days. Hotel. Have afforded me the opportunity. I am presently a professor at State University, New York in New Paltz. I'm part of the Black Studies Department. My primary course is a course, Introduction to Africa. But this term I'm teaching a course entitled Kush and Kemet, which is something that I've been structuring now for a number of years to begin to develop an understanding, really, of who we are as a people, a united people. And so when I hear my brother Kasai always speaking about the unity of Africa, and when I remember Queen Mother Moore, and I remember Laroque Bay, the drummer and dancer here in Harlem, that was one of the early brothers that had you know, the Laroque Bay dancers and drummers, you know. Those who go back know what I'm talking about. You know, that was my first exposure to Yoruba, you know, Shedadani, you know, and the Black Panther Party was my exposure to Kiswahili. And so the organizations of Harlem allowed young brothers like myself and our sister counterparts to understand who we were. And Kemet now, we have this new exhibition. Oh, by the way, let me ask you, how much time do I have to do this? I just want to make sure. It's 4:30 now. I want to make sure I don't go over.
About 10 minutes.
Oh, then I better be quick. So that introduction's over. Because I mean, really what I'm trying to do more than anything else is to bring together an understanding of who we are as a people. And if we don't understand the unity of Africa, then we will have great challenges. The reason King Tut is about to come back. King Tut is coming back in a way he never, in fact, if King Tut were to come back and walk on the planet and see what they did to him, he wouldn't know what they were talking about. Because they have so changed the very structure of African culture and knowledge that if the very nature of King Tut and Akhenaten and all the pharaohs were to come back, they wouldn't even know who they're talking about because they so changed it only to continue the mythology that they had something to do with the construction of African civilization as we know it. With that understanding, we must understand Kush to understand Kemet. And so that's why the course Kush Kemet was developed, because you cannot understand Egypt if you do not understand what was going on in the countries that Professor spoke about. Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia. It's very difficult to understand the very nature of what would bring forward the pyramid builders and the temple builders, the creators of God, the creators of law and justice, Ma'at, Kepra, the process of becoming, the writers of the Shabaka stone, the writers of the pyramid text. If you don't understand what was going internal in Africa, it is said that Egypt is the mouthpiece, but inner Africa is the brain. And it's important that we understand this. So, what I'd like to do is share with you some overheads. Just want to make sure I got it. Ma'at Kara Monges, M-O-N-G-E-S. And she has written a dynamic book entitled Kush, the Jewel of Nubia. There are principles of history and geography that we have to come to sort of kind of understand in order to put this in place. The two things that's most important in placing somebody, you know, Malcolm X taught us that it would probably be history that would be the greatest lesson to learn, because it's in history that we have an understanding of actually what happened. The math, the science, the language arts, the medumenter, the hieroglyphs, all of that has its place. But if you don't understand the history of the people, you might give credit to people who had nothing to do with the project. You might even say that people from outer space came down to do it. I mean, that's deep, you know. They are so afraid to give people of dark complexion credit for the greatness of world culture that they'd rather say that people from outer space came down and did it. Now, my thing is, if I was coming from outer space, coming down, I would probably look for a people that look most like me to share my knowledge. So chances are, no matter how you look like, if they did come from outer space, they're black too. So if we can come to that, then we can start talking about the greatness in the history of Africa. Not only that, but I think we need to stop the debate and just come to a very strong conclusion that the builders of ancient Kemet were the peoples that traveled from the south to the north, and stop the other argument. If they want to discuss this amongst themselves, you go ahead and have that discussion. But we as a people have to now start to spend constructive time for our children to develop a curriculum that will address who they are and what they have contributed. But not just there. How can we take those minds now and build the future? Because just to study what happened in the past, that's dead history. But to apply what happened to the present and see what you can do with it in the future, that's what we have to teach. So that Sister Carr speaks of and defines this concept, and she says kush and kemet. The great civilization of Kemet. This is how we open up the course. This is how we tell the teachers from the students from the beginning. The great civilization of Kemet, or ancient Egypt, will remain a mystery until the people and land of Kush, which we today call Nubia, Sudan, Ethiopia, Abyssinia, Puanit, Somalia, Djibouti, Eritrea, the Horn of Africa, are the people we're talking about. See, remember, these countries weren't divided up until a much later date. As it comes to the minds of an African people, they were a nation. And when I heard Professor speak of all the different breakdowns of all the different groups, Western civilization has a tendency to take land and then build fences. And therefore, they have needs for definitions of what we call continents, although we know continents don't exist. Well, we say they're a continent. It could very well be that to the African mind, they didn't have a word for an African continent. And so all the time we're spending trying to find out what the indigenous people of the continent call the continent, we're losing time studying the nations that built it. The actual framework is of nationhood. And so when you are concerned about nationhood, indigenous people were not wondering about what they were going to call America, because they call themselves Arapaho, they call themselves Apache, they call themselves Cherokee, they call themselves Olmec, they call themselves Maya. They weren't talking about South America, North America, because to them, their worldview, their axiology, may not have just been about concepts of what do we call this whole area. They might have been nation-thinking people as opposed to continent-thinking people. But the future will hold. We may find a word. We have words like Alkibulan. So until these countries are joined, are geographically and culturally enjoined and rejoined to the people and land of Kemet, or ancient Egypt, this process of separation that we call is called the beheading of Africa. This concept of sub-Saharan Africa. We forget at one time there was no desert. What did they call it then? There was only one Africa. Well, at one time there was only African people on the planet. And for millions of years, the people we today call European are relatively very new. They're no more than about 10,000 years old. Japanese are no older than 8. Chinese are no older than 10. And if you go before that, the southern lands was filled with the Kushite people. Drusilla Dunjee Houston's book, Wonderful Ethiopians, talks about the birth of civilization in Africa, and then the movement across the planet of these African people sharing their knowledge and wisdom with the world. So that we're going to place the head back on Africa. And to do that, we're going to join what we call Kush and Kemet. Now, we are used to what we call the Mercator map in our classrooms. The Mercator map is the map right here. This is the Mercator map coming out of mercantilism. This was a map that was updated by ancient maps. The B. Reese map and others that they got from the Moors of North Africa, Africans coming into the world. And they made calculations, and this is the map that we use in the classroom today. However, there's a recent gentleman by the name of Arnold Peters, a cartographer. Cartography is the study of maps. And Arnold Peters is a cartographer, and he has done research over the past maybe 20 years, and he has taken the research that has been taken from the different satellite images of the continent of the Earth, and he has come up with a true to fidelity. Fidelity is reliability. This is closer to the realness of what the planet actually looks like. The Peters projection map really shows what the continents actually look like. And when you look at the difference between the Peters map here and the Mercator map here, you can see that Africa is much larger. The American hemisphere is much larger, Australia is much larger, and Europe is much smaller. Not that I have anything against that. I'm just trying to be as true to the size of the continents as possible. And when we know that there's no such thing as the continents, because we can see that the continents fit very neatly into each other, and this is in science called Pangaea. Our ancestors, the Kemites, called it Ptah. We can see why Africa is in the middle and why Africa would be the place where life would first come, because when this hill rose up out of the waters, it was the African continent, probably that was the one that received the most light and heat energy from the sun, and that light and heat energy would create the types of vegetation and life in the waters that would bring forward life. And that at some point in time there were great eruptions and earthquakes and volcanoes that would separate this one big hill into the continents that we see today. And we just experienced a great upsurge of the earth in Haiti, and we just got something in Chile this morning. And tsunami is on its way very soon, going to hit the planet. And see, what we fail to realize is that if we don't use these as teaching moments, you know, because for me, everybody's talking about Haiti and Port-au-Prince, but I tell my Dominican brothers and sisters, hey, you connected to the island, you better be worried about what's next too. You know, you better be, Puerto Rico better be worried. Central and South America better be worried. See, everybody was worried, and look what happened in Chile this morning. There are fundamental principles happening in the earth that happened in the ancient world. This is the Peters projection map, which is the true fidelity of the earth, as it relates to the pictures taken of the planet and what the continents actually look like, as opposed to the Mercator map, which was basically guesstimations coming from mathematics and possible higher forms of geometry from the ancient Kemites that would make this happen. Now, what began to happen, before we can understand Kush and Kemet and Africa, we look at what's called the Rift Valley. It is a deep crevice in the earth that starts in Mozambique, works its way up the east coast of Africa, the Horn of Africa, moves through the Red Sea into what we today call Israel. Today we call it Israel. Yesterday we called it Palestine. But the day before yesterday we called it Canaan, the Black Land. Don't ever forget that. The Palestinians are the descendants of the Philistines. The Philistines were the ones that murdered the Canaanites. You ever heard the term, what goes around comes around? You shall reap what you sow. Be careful whose side you take. Inside the Rift Valley, right at the cornerstone of it, we have what's called the Great Lakes region. The countries that we call Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya. Parts of Congo, parts of southern Africa that go underneath Tanzania would all be the birthplace, the school, the cradle of the human family. There is only one race on the planet. It's the human race. And because of biology and because of climatology, this human race was born, nurtured, raised, civilized, and cultured in Africa. And as Dr. John Henry Clark teaches us, after Africans got their show together, then they took it on the road. So it wasn't about getting intelligent as you got further north. It was about being intelligent and taking that intelligence to the north. Here is a picture of the Peters projection map as it relates to Africa alone. This is the carving up of Africa post-1885. It's very important for us as an African people to understand that, just as Professor was discussing earlier about how you can have related people, although they may be called in different countries, when you go to northern Kenya and southern Ethiopia, you have a people known as the Konso people. Same people. But because Britain carved Kenya away from the land that we call Ethiopia, the people to the north are called Ethiopians, and the people to the south are called Kenyans. But the people prior to that called themselves the Konso people. You go to Liberia, and you go to Senegal, Sierra Leone and Liberia, to the west of Africa. To the east and west of both these countries, you have a people known as the Vai people. VAI, same people, same culture, same language. But because Europe carved it up, some are called Sierra Leoneans and the other are called Liberians, but they're the same people. Dr. Wade Knowles, great psychiatrist from California, teaches us power is the ability to define someone's reality and have that person accept that definition as if it were their own. If they say you Liberian and they say you Sierra Leonean, but we know we vibe. If you say we vibe, they have no power over you. If you know you Konso, they may call you Ethiopian, but you're Konso. You're Kenyan. But if you say you're Konso, you are what you say you are. You know, it's not what people call you that matters. It's what you answer to. Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, brilliant Senegalese scholar, shows us in his book, The Cultural Unity of Black Africa, fundamentally his research that shows the movement of these early African people from the early area of the Great Lakes region, and how Africans would travel south and they would travel north. As they traveled north, a big part of northeast Africa going down into the northern part of the Horn, the ancient peoples would be called the Garamantes. G-A-R-A-M-A-N-T-E-S. This comes out of Sheikh Anta Diop's research. Africans would travel to the west to become the Sere, the Tukala, the Dogon of Mali, the Leobe, the Pul, the Vai that we spoke about, the Ashanti, the Kisi, the Yoruba, the Fang. They would move west. So even Nigerians are not indigenous to Nigeria. Ghanaians are not indigenous to Ghana. The only area is called autochthonous, if I'm saying it right. Autochthonous means that you came up out the soil. The only place where folk come up out the soil is Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. Every place else they travel to. Here I just want to give us an idea of the Hapi and the sources of the Hapi, coming from what we call the Great Lakes region right around the equator, traveling north. The Hapi River is what the Kemites called it. We today call it Nile. Our ancestors called it Hapi. And that Hapi is the only river on the planet that travels from south to north. In other words, we say here in New York, we're going down south. Kemites would say, I'm going down north and up south because of the flow of the river. You talk about up and down as it relates to the flow of the river. So the river travels from south to north. And so this would be the natural movement of the human family that would travel from south to north. So it makes very good sense why Kemet, or Egypt, first of all, Egypt didn't exist until thousands and thousands and thousands of years after the inundation left the soil, because you have the White Nile in the southern part, and it travels, it meanders, it goes up. When it gets to where the Y is, right about here, this is Khartoum. This is where the White Nile and the Blue Nile meet. And it is there that the Blue Nile comes down from Lake Tana and another Lake Atabara, and comes down and meets this white waters with a very rich silt, very dark blue-green silt, and because of that it's called the Blue Nile. And if it weren't for the Blue Nile, the Nile River, Hapi, would stop at Khartoum. It's the power of that water coming down, surging out of the mountains of what we today call Ethiopia, that pushes that water forward and empties out into the Mediterranean. And every time they would have an inundation, every year the water would flow, it would recede back down, and it would leave a little bit more of this rich silt along the banks of this river. And eventually enough silt was left over for it to actually happen, and that's when Menem, or Narmer, the first pharaoh of the first dynasty, diverted the waters of Hapi around what we today call Memphis. They called it Hikupata. Rediverted the waters, and they dumped up land, and that would be what would be called Hikupata, because Pata means hill, and so the idea was to build up land was like creating a hill, so they called it Hikupata, or the essence of Pata. Hikupata was something that the Greeks could not pronounce, so they did not call it Hikupata, they called it Egupatos. Hiku, Egu, Pata, Patos. Egupatos became Egypt. So even when we say Egypt, we're still calling it an African word, but we don't know our history. So we don't know that Egypt came from Egupatos, and Egupatos came from Hikupata. See, we don't really understand how great a people we are. And so people celebrate us fighting each other. Because once we stop, it's all over. It's all over once we realize the value, the true African Ma'atian value of when I help you, I help myself. And when I help myself, I become better. And if I became better by helping you and you became better together as an African people, man, I don't want to hear nothing about I'm Puerto Rican, I'm Dominican, I'm Jamaican, I'm Haitian, I'm African American, I'm Ethiopian, I'm Nigerian, you're black. Africa for Africans are home and abroad. We must honestly feel this. Sound good, but we must honestly as the people feel this. Because, just as Professor said earlier, it is our nature to work together. It's not our nature to fight. I'm not saying that everything is all good and great and we didn't have our skirmishes. We did, but we're human. But Ma'at demanded as a base of society that you lived in reciprocity and harmony and respect for all those things that the Creator created, and all of those things deserved the respect of the Creator. Now here, Kushite Kingdom. We are now looking at the Horn of Africa coming up into Kemet. When you get into Egypt, you see that I've developed that concept of the redirecting of the waters of Hapi that would create Memphis, or Hikupata. The map of Africa off to the side with the darkness shows you this is where African people took that level of mastery of nature, created mentors, and began to develop a society that reflected nature around them, and then built a spiritual technology. That's almost like an oxymoron, spirituality, technology. But Africans knew how they could blend both the spirit and the secular. They understood you can't give to Caesar what is Caesar and God, God, because one and the same. We are one and the same people. You cannot separate. So therefore they realized that spirituality was unseen science, and science was seen spirituality. And they understood that each and every creation, as we move to this level, we are God having a human experience. And that when I do for another person, I do for the Creator, as I do for the least of my brothers and sisters. Dr. Clark used to say, Africans don't say I'm my brothers and sisters' keeper. They just kept them. Kushite kingdom. Now let's get more specific. You're looking at the cataracts from Khartoum in the north to when you get down to Aswan in Egypt. Now, what this brother did in terms of this sister Monjes, she turned it as the world is seen by African people. See, we see the world north to south. So therefore, we see Egypt up here, and, or I should say the Mediterranean Sea up here, and we see the source of the Nile down here. But when you are southerly oriented, you don't see up there, because up is not north, it's in fact south. So when you look down the river, you're looking at the Mediterranean Sea, and so what Sister did is she flipped the script. And she made the Mediterranean Sea down south, and the origins of Africa, Lake Tana, Atabara, and the Nile River flow as it does from the south to the north. And so that's a map of the ancient kingdom that would lead to concepts as we know of the nations that we today, the ancient nations we call Kerma, Napata, and Meroe. Not to mention, as you move towards the Red Sea, you have the kingdoms of Aksum and Adulis, other kingdoms that would move over, because there was a time in history that African civilization, in fact, Dr. Clark said to have a true African map, you must include the peninsula of Saudi Arabia. Because Saudi Arabia was as much a part of Africa as the African continent itself. In fact, the kingdom of Saba, we call her the Queen of Sheba, Makeda, she not only ruled parts of what we would call East Africa, she also had her kingdom over in the west coast of Saudi Arabia. How's my time?
That's all right.
I just want to make sure I'm within the rights and responsibilities. Again, here's another concept. Going from Nubia in the north, coming down to the delta, this more or less has the major cities of ancient Kemet. They were interrelated. They shared their knowledge and wisdom. If you get a DVD that is hosted by Taki Grant, and Dr. Leonard Jeffries is on it, it's called Nubia. It's a fantastic DVD you need to have and to watch. Because they talk about these different nations and how they built. There's another National Geographic DVD that talks about the greatness of what we call Nubia. And you see, Nubia, we have to be careful, because from what we understand, Nubia, in the Kemetic language, did not describe a people. It meant gold, which is where the Kemites used to go get their gold from, because Nubia or Sudan was so plentiful in gold, they called it Nub, which meant gold. It didn't necessarily mean black, and so we have to be careful in attempting to call it Nubia as a geographic location, because it may not be, and probably is not what they called. You know, it's like if you had, let's say you have Fort Knox where we have the gold, right? And let's say you go to Fort Knox to get gold, but then let's say you call the land Fort Knox. No, gold means gold. Fort Knox is where you get the gold. It doesn't describe the geographic location. Okay? These are the kind of psychological breakdowns we have to make as an African people, looking at the history and culture of Africa, so that we can put the head back on to Africa. Because for as long as Egypt is separated, they will always be able to give credit to people from outer space, because nothing will ever make any sense. But when you get up into Africa and see what those of south of Kemet were creating, you can see it would only be a natural progression that they would build the pyramids further north. But they're not going to do it, so we have to do it. How are you going to ask the person that oppressed you to tell you the truth? If they were going to tell you the truth, they wouldn't have oppressed you in the first place. And here is another. I flipped it back around just so we could get reoriented. As it relates when you get down to Kush, you know, and you get down to the cataracts, the fifth cataract. A cataract is a rocky interruption, just so you know what it is, and there are 6 of them along Happy. And so you have to understand that whoever named these cataracts had to have been European or traveling from the north. Because from an African perspective, the southernmost cataract would have been the first cataract and not the 6th. And the first cataract would have been the 6th cataract because of the nature of where they were traveling. So these people are talking from their own perspective, their own concept about this. And so here, you have here in the north, Giza, Saqqara, and what's interesting is that you have these civilizations developing themselves and becoming great after African have already developed these concepts to the south. How was our time? Okay, we're going to move through this. Because now that we have established Kush as the centerpiece, the foundations of the brain and the ideas that would create the monuments and the temples to create the first dynasty, that would create a pharaonic system that we know is in existence in southern part, in a place called Kustal, which is in what we today call Sudan. We know that Kustal actually was a centerpiece where we can see the pharaonic system. We can see pictographs of Heru, we can see the temple facade, we can see the boat that they would ride as they move through Amenta or the afterlife, as they move through life. So you can see that 15 to 20, as Dr. Ivan Van Sertima speaks about in Blacks in Science. Bruce Williams wrote an essay talking about the lost pharaohs of Nubia. That in fact this entire pharaonic system existed 200 years before the first dynasty of Kemet. We know that Medu-Neter, or what the Greek call hieroglyphs, was not created in Kemet. We know it was already brought. There are things that our brothers and sisters in Kemet added, but they did not create Medu-Neter or the pictographic language. They did not create the hieratic, which is a scriptiform of the Medu-Neter. We of course understand that there is a Meroitic script that we I think, and when I say we, I mean we as a society. I'm not going to say necessarily that the peoples of Sudan and Africa don't know. But we have not yet deciphered what the Meroitic script is about. But there's a great essay, again in Blacks in Science, that talks about the Meroitic script. But just so we can get to the major cities that were created in Kemet by these Kushites, these Africans, we can see Abydos, which is where Osiris or Asar was buried, believed to be a holy place. In fact, if you talk about the Holy Land, you're talking about the Nile Valley civilization. Okay, that's the Holy Land. That's you talk Holy Land, that's the Holy Land. Okay. Starting where we're looking at in terms of Nubia and going north. And then the Holy Land spread. But the Holy Land is where Africa spread. Here, this goes along with that map, but these are some of the major cities that existed during ancient times and the different theologies that were created. So in Sais, you had the Temple of Net. In Alu or Heliopolis or On, you had the Temple of Ra. In Mennefer or Ptah, you had Memphis or the Temple of Ptah. In Saqqara was written the pyramid text. In Akhenaten, you had the city of Akhenaten, the temple of Aten, and what is called the hymn to Aten, or the Aten text. In Abdu, you had the temple of Asar. In D.Gregory, you had the temple of Heru, or Hathor. In Waset, you had what they called it Thebes, the temple of Amun, which was Karnak. And in Edfu, you had the temple of Heru. And in Philae, you had the temple of Aset. The cities wherein the theology of the Trinity of Asar, Aset, Heru was developed were Anu, Abydos, Philae, Edfu, Dendra, and Edfu. In fact, in Christianity, you have the Annunciation, you have the Immaculate Conception, and then you have the birth of this Christ child. Well, at the temple of Philae, you have the same exact thing carved in the walls 2,000 years before Christianity was ever even heard of, which is really another form of the Amen priesthood. That's another discussion for another day. And Atomism is where Judaism came from. And when both religions wanted to blend the two, that's where Islam came from. Islam came from the mountains of Ethiopia through Balaam. Come on, let's get real with this. Because we have to understand these fundamental principles of where these faith systems have come from. They come from an African mind. And that's why Balaam, when he came back with 10,000 Ethiopians to escort the Prophet Muhammad into the city of Ma'at, not Mecca, Ma'at, the spirit of Ma'at, the spirit of balance. And that black Kaaba stone that they circled 7 times, well, that's a remnant of the astronomical observatory, because Mecca used to be the sister lodge of the Grand Lodge, or Wasset. And that's why they circled that Kaaba, that black stone, because that used to be the pyramidion that would draw light and heat energy. But again, this is astronomy. Have you ever noticed that every religion is based on astronomy? Christianity is the cross, or the crooks, the crossing over. Judaism is the inverted pyramid, which is the Star of David. And Islam is the crescent moon and star. All based on astronomy. And when we all die, where we want to go? We want to go to heaven, because we want to study astronomy. So that, basically what I've attempted to break down to you and to support and to blend with the prior great speakers that we've had talk to us is an understanding of the foundations of what we're looking at in terms of African history. There's a lot more I have yet to learn. I'm researching every day. And I'm just learning so much about our history and our culture. But I wanted to come and share this with you, and I want to look to a time when, like what Dr. Clark used to always say, is what I tend to say when I get into discussions with folks, because we don't have a debate. Because like I tell them straight up, when I say them, I'm talking about those that would wish to negate what I just said. See, we can't have a debate, because to have a debate, you got to have 2 sides, and they ain't got a side. Dr. Clark used to always say, I debate my equals, but I lecture all others, and right now there's a lecture. They don't have a side. And as long as we argue, we give them the right to have a side. Right now we have to build a curriculum for our people and our children worldwide that connects us to the mouthpiece of Africa, which is the Kushite kingdom of the Horn of Africa. Receding down into that Horn of Africa, we go to Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, where the human family was born and raised and taught. And there we study. And after we get our show together, then we take it on the road. Hotel.
I'd like to thank Professor Coleman for that information, that teaching lesson. We may have a couple of minutes for questions. Does anybody have a question? This gentleman here.
For any of the panelists, or general questions on the organization, or general questions as it relates to us as a people, as a collective.
Which one is that?
Is there a particular kush?
Yeah, Kush by Miriam. Miriam Ma'at. Yes, ma'am, we'll talk about it. And then there's another book, of course, that I use as a text, Sheikh Anta Diop's book, African Origins, Myth or Reality. That's the other textbook that we use. That those 2 books together really give a great understanding of the historical foundations of what would make kemet.
Yes.
I like the presentation, I'm very impressive. But let me ask you a question. As a contemporary scholar, at a time when Africa is dealing with poverty, where in the case of Somalia, where the state has collapsed, what role do you think remembering the good old days would do? I can tell you one thing. Franz Fanon, I'm sure you know, he says it's good to elevate Africa, you know? But, I mean, by remembering the past, but he says, because we have been oppressed, and this elevating of the past is a reaction to slavery, racism, whatever. So he said, your presentation, he would say, Fanon, could be a transition, but not a conclusion. Or what is it?
I say, Elder Brother, you're absolutely correct. I say you're absolutely correct. And that's why I said earlier that knowing this is dead history. Is being able to do something with it. From what I'm looking at, if I may speak at this point as an African American, we all are Africans wherever we come from, but I'm speaking as an African American. Our history, when we were enslaved, was taken from us. And put in place was a history of another people that made them superior to us. All of the potentials of what we possibly could do, just like with the election of President Barack Obama, there were people that said, American people of African descent said, I never thought this day would come. My mother told me I would never live to see a day where a black man could become president. Infused, as Bob Marley teaches us, it is institutionalized that black people have never achieved anything and have never done anything. In an educational system, what we just went through creates a support system upon which a people in an educational system can see the potential. Because one of the things they said about President Obama becoming president is that now it has opened up the way that young black children see themselves as possibly being a president. Opened it up, made it seem possible. Although we argue with the first this and the first that, the first scientist, the first doctor, what does it really mean to the masses of people? For a people who have been told they've achieved nothing, that they have contributed nothing to history, this allows them to at least see the potential within them. But this is not the answer. This is just a way in which you can open up a door that will allow you to become the great engineer that Imhotep was. To understand that you can come back into Harlem and you can become the architects of our community and you can build up. To know that you have been able to lead a nation all by yourself shows you that Barack Obama is not necessarily something that just happened. He's not the first leader. He's not, but he is in a long line of great leaders because we come from great leaders. So that this information, as Frantz Fanon rightly said, if we get caught up and just walk around spouting this, it means nothing to me. But if we can have our young people in math class understand the genius of the math that went into the building of the pyramids, or Gebel Barka that is in Nubia, and know that they can build those buildings because they did it before, it gives them an impetus to do it because they understand it's been done before. But you are absolutely, and you know, I often get into this discussion because I don't want folk to think this is just about praising Imhotep, because all that becomes is ethnic cheerleading. I want you to be Imhotep. I want you to be Hatshepsut. I want you to be the kings and queens of Napata, because that's in your royal blood. You have that potential. So psychologically, a people who've been oppressed cannot see the vision of their success because they've done nothing. You're animals. You're trash. And you're a slave. You were born to be a slave. This allows them to see themselves in a different light. But it is not to be the light that you bask in. It's the light you create for yourself that you bask in. But this gives us an opportunity to see this, because I know when Dr. Clark introduced me to my culture and history, that slave thing went out the window. Yeah. I was no longer a slave, I just happened to be an imposed prisoner. There's a difference between a prisoner and a slave. There were Africans on a plantation, lived and died on the plantation doing someone else's will. Not one day were they ever a slave, they were prisoners. We got folk walking up here on Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard today that are a slave. Because slavery is a mental thing. And once you know something, it frees your mind. So I think this can be used as a tool in our schools. A tool.
Yeah, I have two questions. One is, one of the speakers spoke about how African leaders are there for life, like monarchs. So my question is, Mo Ibrahim of the Sudan has this pot of money that he gives out to leaders to encourage them to leave from being heads of state. What do y'all think of that as a tool to encourage African leaders to leave? My second question has to do with the Horn of Africa and Pan-Africanism. You know, like the African Union is in Somalia and in Darfur for peace. Can Pan-Africanism and Islamic fundamentalism from Pakistan or Afghanistan with the Taliban or out of Saudi Arabia and infecting, from my perspective, African unity, where African states are in the Arab League and they pay more attention to the Arab League than they pay to the African Union. What do y'all think about the conflict between Pan-Africanism, which I am, and I hope most of us are, and Islamic fundamentalism in the Horn of Africa?
This is
If I'm permitted, actually, what I want to say is before I answer your question, I really want to supplement what the professor said in reaction to Professor Lessons. Is that okay? All right. The significance of history, of knowing history. By the way, knowing history is tantamount to knowing your identity and background. What they've done is, in this country, by the way, in 1712, there was a meeting of slave owners in Jamestown, Virginia. And the person who organized that meeting is William Lynch. William Lynch is one of the slave owners who came from the Caribbean, by the way, not the United States. They had a summit meeting to really solve a problem. Like I told you earlier, we are facing a problem. These African slaves are unruly. They're burning the sugar cane, the tobacco. They're killing their masters. What should we do? See, William Lynch is a genius for his people, for his interest. He said, I have a blueprint. That blueprint is actually, first and foremost, divide and rule the Africans. Second, create mistrust among themselves. Third, tell them that they have no history, no civilization, nothing, not even names, no religion. The fourth thing is, if this doesn't work, the 1, 2, 3 doesn't work, we employ the lash 40 times. And when we use the lash, it's not the slave owners, the white people going to use the lash. The Africans themselves, so it dehumanized both of them. And he told them, by concluding, if we follow the blueprint, it's going to work at least for 50 years. For more than that, even forever, he said. To some extent it worked, but not quite. There was the Haitian Revolution, there were the revolutions all over actually. In the southern part of the United States, all over. And if you remember Roots, you remember Roots, that movie that we've seen, who the author Alex Haley. Alex Haley has done extensive research so that he can find himself. He went to Gambia, that little country in West Africa. For 12 years he researched, and he wrote Roots. If you remember, in Roots, the main actor, Kunta Kinte, he was being lashed because they told him, what's your name? My name is Kunta Kinte. No, that's not your name. Your name is Toby. They want to give him a name. Because by disconnecting them from their heritage, most of African people, of African descent, people can be lost in the wilderness called America. Once you're lost, you're not going to find your way. So going back to Kush, to Ethiopia, that thing is very important. If you remember also A.B. Caesar from Martinique, that small island in the Caribbean, he came with the concept negritude, meaning African personality and pride. Negritude. If we actually inculcate that into the mind of the young generation Africans in the Caribbean, in the United States, they will have this boost, moral boost, self-esteem, and they will fight for their rights. Otherwise, you don't have guidance, you don't have a map road. You're not going to really go through all that. So that's very important to know. Coming to your point now. Okay. Earlier on I said, we can always talk about many things. We can fantasize sometimes. Islamic thing, the Islamic factor is there. It's a reality. But it's being exaggerated. The problem actually is from within Africa itself. The Somali clan structure itself is right there. Okay? So now it's being exaggerated because the Al-Shabaab are definitely influenced by outside forces.
Yes.
But I want you to make sure that you don't confuse Arab League with the jihadist movements, which are the extremists, of course, in that sense. Arab League actually is part of Africa too. Okay, Egypt, for instance, was part of Arab League, but part of the African Union too. Jamal Abdel Nasser was part of Arab League, but he was also the founder of Organization for African Unity. So we have to differentiate and try to see what the real problem is really. There are the jihadists, there are the extremists, but the Arab League should not be confused with that. The northern part of Africa, thank you before we were talking about so-called Sub-Sahara, which I don't agree with. The entire continent from Egypt to Cape Town is Africa for me. So Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Algeria, very good. All these Arab-speaking people actually came in the 7th century AD after the Prophet Muhammad died and intermingled with Africans, the indigenous Africans who were there, Berbers. So we have an Afro-Asiatic, Afro-Arab culture, as a matter of fact. Okay? So, very well, these are bright people. Look, Bourguiba of Tunisia, Nasser and Bembela of Algeria. All these were all Africans, although they had that Arab heritage too. Okay.
What about Mo Ibrahim? Mo Ibrahim from the Sudan?
Okay. Actually, you have to answer that. What do you want to say about that?
No, someone had mentioned, it might have been you, that African heads of state don't leave power, they stay there forever.
Exactly.
He has this concept, he's a billionaire, where he offers people, I think, $5 million, or what have you, to leave once their term is over, as an incentive. So that's just...
Yeah, that's a good idea, but you know. Huh? That's what we right. Yeah, that's not
On two things I want to add. That is one is about Sudan. I have colleagues, including me and others. North Sudan calls themselves Arabs, you know that. Someone know that, and we tease them this way. When North Sudanese go to Saudi Arabia, they suddenly become African. Because in the eyes from that side, So I think there is this problem we have to challenge. North Sudan for me is African, period. Even though there has been a long, years of Arab culture, but I don't know why they cannot be proud enough. I have really a reservation. The other thing is, I don't think that's the solution. We're going to bail out every dictator. They come, please go outside and we'll give you money. No, I just don't agree with that.
Mr. Thomas over here.
I can talk about it. I'm going to comment on the solution, because everybody's talking about solutions. I mean, gathering from what the speeches have been. It's a little bit off the wall, but you say think out the box, right? Number one, first thing I'd like all professors to do is call a conference. And that purpose of that conference would be to divide Europe. There are certain areas where we Africans want to colonize and recolonize it, because y'all told me that Africans were the first Europeans. And that conference would do certain things. It would move us from a defensive position to an offensive position. The Europeans themselves will look at this group, these lowlights, daring to say they don't have an army, that they're going to colonize Europe. And for example, Botswana will get France from just making these things. We're dividing out ourselves. See? They would like to see, of course, because it's only human nature, who wants me. so I can cuss them out later. That's only human nature. Now, what that would do is, like I said, they can't give you what is economists, they're taking over Harlem. What should we do? Of course, as I said to them before, to save Harlem, we must take Manhattan. And we can take Manhattan, as I exposed that to them, through reverse verbs. I'm just showing you that the way to win wars is to fight offensively. Now, what would that do internally, in my mind? When you guys get in and knock it out and say we voted on this, and we're going to now move in that direction, and you tell your people, because they were Africans there, we're now moving to recapture Africa, it changes not our mindset, but we have to get work and start doing something. So I just want to throw that out and see if that's it.
I don't think I need that. I have a question. What happens to the history of Nubia now that Egypt's submerged it under the Nile?
Would you say because of the Nile flooding and what happened? I'm concerned that we're depending too much of our future on some of the things that we have to find out from the past. Please let me explain what I said, because I'm not being contradictory. All of the genes and all of the knowledge and all of the wisdom that our ancestors had is in each and every one of our minds. When you get to a point where you understand what you have to do, just do it. And it goes back to something you're saying. Because I see the value of history, knowing history, but it's like a slingshot. You know, the concept of a slingshot is that the further back you pull it, the further in front of you it will be propelled. The further you go back into your knowledge and your history, the further you can project for your future. I realize there's a lot of damage happening in Nubia. There are probably civilizations that are under civilizations that we're looking at right now. I think that if we should take what we know and go with what we know and go deep inside ourselves, we can create a future for ourselves. And I think that's where we have to go. We have to be sensible in what we're going to do with this knowledge and wisdom. We have to prepare for this 21st century that we're in. We have to return back to the universal principles of our ancestors with the knowledge and wisdom and technology of today, and to build a civilization where we can build our own communities, where we can have people from the entire African diaspora, or if I can call into being the 54th state of Africa. See, because I don't need anyone to tell me I can have that. I declared it when I said it. You declared it. So I'm saying I'd like to see people from Jamaica and Puerto Rico and República Dominicana and from Ethiopia and from all African nations, even Africans from London. You see, working on the same project, building a home for our communities. So that when something like Haiti started, we did. And we don't need a concert. Then we just pick ourselves up, get there, and do what needs to be done for our people in this particular area of the world. But that's a whole bunch of talk, I know. I can hear you talking to me. We have to be real about this. We have to call this into being in our classrooms and tell our children that they can do this, and that you need to start to look at wind and water and all the things in nature that we always depended on, and forget about all of this make-believe artificial technology that is up and down and will destroy the air and the water, and we have to return back. Because I'll tell you the truth, if I had my druthers between having a lack of oil and a lack of water, I'll walk where I gotta go, but I need water. We have to be thinking about what we're going to do about the water and about polluting the earth. We need to go back to George Washington Carver and understand how we can bring life back to this earth, just like George Washington Carver was able to take the peanut and the soybean, bring it back to the plantations of the South that only grew cotton. We have to be thinking on a real level. Return back to Africa. Stop thinking like the Western world, trying to get rich in Africa and then bring back the riches to where you live. Leave the riches in Africa. Let that develop itself. Develop here, develop there. We have to start thinking about these. And I think we're doing it. Day by day, step by step. It's happening as we speak. It took us hundreds of years to get in this position. It's going to take a while to get out. So let's just be real about this and start with our babies. Start with the children. Start in the school. Start with them so that we can see the future grow. And you know, to me, I think that's a practical way of starting. And you know what we can do right now as we start this? When you see a brother or a sister in the street, your brother got the hat on sideways, pants falling off his butt, you see his dirty drawers. Say hello to him. Just say hello. Start there. Start talking to them and stop turning up your lip at them. Just say hello to them. How you doing? And you'd be surprised. The hardest hard face will crash down on the ground and give you a smile that you never thought was there. We need to talk to our people.
Before this lecture left the stage, I had said to him, while we're here, we should take this body to do some sort of proposal or some sort of paper, if you will, to tell these European people we don't want to be governed by them any longer. We can govern ourselves. So I said this to you, we should put this together so we can go to the United Nations and let the United Nations know we are governable. And this should start right here in home. But since these brothers are here from Europe and Africa and different city universities, we should start this today. We should let this be our Bandon conference. But we can start to govern ourselves. Because we can do it. We're not idiots. We did it the first time. These people took from us and called it theirs. We can do it. I think that's long enough. This sister over here had a question. I want you to comment on that too.
Our sister has come down to earth. We shouldn't be talkers. We have to transform our talks into action. That's what matters. I mean, if we talk and live, and next month we come together, talk and live, and talk and live, it's nothing. So we have to start acting. I like the point you raised. Let's be on the offensive, not on the defensive. I mean, if you are in the defensive, you will always sit and vegetate. You will not be active. So let's be active, let's act. So we can gather our views, our opinions, raise it, transmit it to our children, to our brothers, and then take it to whoever can listen and act. And there are so many bodies who can act, international bodies, regional bodies, who are concerned about our plight, about Africa's plight. So let's take them, let's elevate them. So let's start acting now.
This sister has a question.
Greetings, one and all. My question is directed to Dr. Kaba, as well as whoever on the panel feels free that they can answer it. Something that is very little known is that the Hyksos or Hyksos shepherd kings, and you made a very vague reference to it, Dr. Kaba, when you said that Judaism came out of, what did you say, the Aksumite Empire? Aten, yes, Aten, okay. Very few people understand that the Hyksos shepherd kings were Hebrew Israelites, and they ruled the upper part of Egypt, which is, as you say, coming up from the south. It's actually up north, but, you know, anyhow, it's reversed. So they ruled over 300 years, if I'm correct. You correct me if I'm wrong. And as a result, this history is very much hidden and it's covered up. And I'd like you to elaborate on that, please. And also, the Hyksos shepherd kings, they trace their ancestry back to the Sumerians, the Sumerian royalty, okay, in the kingdom of Chaldea. So that takes note, and also we should do our research on that as well.
some of the things that were said in a very quick historical understanding. It appears that the later peoples of Eurasian descent, and I use the word Eurasian to cover the northern cradle. I'm not even going to try to separate European from Asian, because basically I look at them as Dr. Diop teaches us, a northern cradle and a southern cradle. Northern cradle are the ones that were impacted by a change in environment and climate, and then impacted by the last ice age, which is the Warm Ice Age, in which they stayed in there a couple of 10,000s of years. Long story short, Amenism, as we research it, according to the scholars from an African perspective, was a ruling theocracy in Kemet. And there was also a concept of the Aten, which was pictured by the sun, which was looked upon as the light and heat energy that came from the sun. We're talking in philosophy now. And what occurred was that first 6 dynasties, the Old Kingdom, great things are happening. However, they're getting lackadaisical. Africans only, getting lackadaisical as it relates. And there was a pharaoh, they say, of the 5th dynasty named Pepi, lived a very long time, and began to usurp the power of the middle class, the masses of people, by giving a great deal of power to the Amen priesthood. The Amen priesthood would then prop the pharaoh to be the one divine creator, and they were taking advantage of the people. There was a rebellion in Kemet amongst African people, which brings forward the first intermediate period. There had been people that had come out of the mountains and had been kicked west as they came along, out of what we call Persia or Iran, Afghanistan. These are people kicked out, warlike Eurasian people. They get to this area that we today call Israel. Yesterday Palestine, the day before yesterday Canaan. And I say that constantly for us never to forget who was in that land first. And what they do is that they're at war with the indigenous African people there, so they start to move across, taking advantage of the inner fighting, which goes back to something very interesting. Something that was said about the power, Professor, when you spoke about how sometimes that concept of the Arab is overplayed, it's overemphasized. It's very important to understand something. In all of the history I've ever done about our people, I've never seen a people come out of Eurasia and conquer African people. I've often seen African people fighting amongst themselves. And they come over and take advantage of that divide and conquer. Willie Lynch. It's an ancient Willie Lynch syndrome. And so what happens is that they start coming across into what we today call Northern Africa through the Delta. These individuals now are being called, by the indigenous Africans, they're being called Haibri. H-A-I-B-R-I. To get more information, Dr. Yosef Ben Levi, in a book entitled Kemet and the African Worldview, talks about this phenomenon of the 1st and 2nd dynasty. The people crossing over are being called Haibri, and the leaders that keep bringing them over are being called Haibrians. So this is where you get the term Hebrew and Abraham from. It doesn't have anything to do with the religious, because Judah, first of all, the letter J didn't even exist in their vocabulary.
Go ahead.
So they couldn't have been called Jews, and it couldn't have been called Judaism. So we know that. His name wasn't Jehovah, it was Yahweh. J and Y are interchangeable, and when you look at Meditate, you can see the feather. And that's another interesting thing. That's to come when we do this at the UN. Now all this information will be when we do the UN. Long story short, when you get to the 18th dynasty, you have these individuals that have sided with Akhenaten, who has political religious intrigue in the dynasty. They changed the Amen priesthood. He changes his name from Amenhotep IV to Akhenaten. He makes Atenism the official language of the Kemetic civilization. The Amen priesthood goes to war, and they, according to what research says, he gets killed. His younger brother, Queen Tai, is sitting on the throne as co-regent. His younger brother, Tutankhaten, rises to the throne after Horemheb. Tutankhaten, they tell Queen Tai, they say, look, Queen Tai, we have a lot of respect for you, and we know you're trying your best, but you got to talk to your son. Because if he keeps this up, we're going to do the same thing to him that we did to your last son. So get them together. She speaks to her son. He changes his name from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamen. He restores the Amen priesthood. The Amen priesthood don't trust him, and they kill him anyway. That brings in then the I, who is the last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, comes in and paves the way for the 19th dynasty, where Setai the first comes in, and then you have Ramses II and the Ramessids come in, and they go to war with the Hyksos. They go to war with them shepherd kings, and they drive them out of Africa. But Africa has already been weakened with the internal fighting amongst themselves. And as I take my seat, we must stop fighting amongst ourselves. I don't care how I feel. Look, we have a bigger fish to fry. And I may have absolute differences with another brother, but I'm going to love you unconditionally. And together we're going to bang our heads in private, but when we go out, we're holding hands. Because we must get this together. We fight amongst ourselves too much. The Willie Lynch syndrome is too much around us. It's taking all sorts of parts of us. And we still fight each other. And we have to stop it. Because that's what weakens us. We as a people cannot be defeated. It's when we fight amongst ourselves. The nature of brother against brother, sister against sister weakens us. And anybody can beat a weak fish. The only difference between a Puerto Rican, a Dominican, a Haitian, an African American, and an African from London, Dr. Clark teaches us, is a boat stop. And we have to understand this. But in relationship, please let me give you a book to read while we're doing this. There's a book by Ahmed Aslan. It's written Akhenaten Moses, because the truest historical figure of Moses is Akhenaten. See, what they tend to do is they tend to take our historical figures and superimpose their spiritual philosophies, and that becomes their religion. Jesus the Christ is measured by a brother named Yeshua de Pantera, who lived 156 BC, said to be one of the finest African priests that ever walked the face of the earth. And so that's where they took the concept of the historical Jesus and placed them over. A book to get is mythological Jesus, historical Christ, or vice versa, by Gerald Massey. Or get a book, Echoes of the Old Darkland by Charles Finch. It'll break it down to you. All this information is here, brothers and sisters, but it goes back to what we're talking about. It means nothing if we're just going to sit here and clap, or if we're just going to talk. It means nothing. It's nothing but a bunch of talk. We got to put this in action and start to build the nation for our people and for our future. And again, like the brother said, get proactive. Because like he said, if you're always on the defense, you're always going to react. When you get on the offense, you proact. And when you proact, you knock your enemy off guard, because now they're on the defense.
Thank you so much, Professor Coleman. I'd also like to say, can we set up a date when we can come up with some of these solutions? We can. We'll talk about it later.
Of Africa, so I came with some questions that's on my mind. Okay. Last year, I went to Kemet for the first time with the Dessert Club. I went as far south as Abu Simbel, so I got to see a lot of the antiquities and the history with my own eyes. But Abu Simbel is close to Sudan, and dealing with reality of the world that we live in today, there's going to be a vote next year with Southern Sudan. John Garang is dead. But for 40 years, they were fighting for their independence because they want to keep their traditional African culture and not have everything imposed on them from Khartoum. So my question to the scholars and anybody here who wants to answer is, what do y'all think about the possibility that Southern Sudan will vote for independence? I've heard that they might want to call that new nation Nubia if they come into, but there will be a vote. Unless, of course, Khartoum does something to stop that. They agreed 5 years ago. So what do y'all think about the possibility of there being a new nation in Southern Sudan? Do y'all think that would be good, or do you think that would be bad?
Well, this is my view. The partition of Africa, as you know, has been going on for the age of colonialism. They have divided us. And now, we don't need further division. We need unity. Bigger unity, greater unity. Now, with reference to South and North Sudan, they are one people. They don't need to separate. and create mini states. I mean, it doesn't stop there also, dividing societies into states. It will not stop there. What should stop is the reasons that is pushing them to exercise this division, to call for this division. That is repression, oppression. Okay? Oppression should stop. Repression should stop. Domination should stop. So, the common people of the South and North Sudan should cooperate, should stand together and fight for oppressors, be it on the North or on the South. I can take it to Ethiopia, where Eritrea has separated from Ethiopia. But what did we end up in creating two dictators instead of one? We have now a dictator in Eritrea, another dictator in Ethiopia. So we ended up in creating two dictators instead of one dictator. Okay? So, division or separation or secession is not a solution. The solution is what people induces, pushes, call for this type of solutions to solve them. So, let's solve the problems.
Exactly. And I didn't mean to give a question. I mean, we can have questions for next year. We should be talking about a solution.
This is a solution. I mean, I was just
They're
talking
going to have
about
that
current
vote.
events.
They're going to have that vote regardless. They're going to vote next year. There's going to be stuff after that that we still going to question about. But if we have to move on, we have to move on. We can't wait until every solution or every situation is brought up before we decide whether we want to
I
move on.
know. I'm saying this is a forum on East Africa.
Right.
And so I'm asking a question about
And
Sudan.
I'm agreeing with you too, brother.
Sister Juanita.
Okay.
Two more questions.
Two more questions. This gentleman here and Brother Kazan.
I want to commend all our people for being here today. I would ask you all to give yourself a round of applause for being here as concerned African people. For the gentleman here, being one of the generals who were involved in some of the struggles in Africa, and I commend your advice. We should not tolerate any idea of separation. This is not the time to be thinking like that. When we have problems, we don't separate our lands and our people. We deal with the issue. And for sister, it's very good that we're suggesting working on a solution, but we're not going to write the Europeans telling them that we are going to free ourselves. We're going to write one telling us, among us, making an agreement that we are going to act on freeing ourselves.
Okay.
So this, we don't go to the people who enslave us to ask them.
Well, we're not asking you.
We don't ask them. We taking it. We have to seize it. It's naturally ours. So, as you said, and Dr. Thomas' idea is not far-fetched. We have seen situations where we have Africans leaving the shores of Africa to go into places like Spain. Often the immigration rules there and laws are no different and sometimes more extreme than we have here in the United States towards immigrants. However, when you look at the real estate market in Spain today, it's frozen, it's stuck. Now all those Africans who you see turning up on the shores of Spain, they were the labor pool who was used to build some of these buildings. However, if we Africans were to organize ourselves properly and make sure that we connect to each one of those brothers, all those developments that are now frozen, we can indeed build them, have our people living in them, then that's when it shocks Spain. We automatically take over the place. So we have a lot of things going for us. We just have to, as we are doing here today, and that's why I commended you all, we can now work together. A lot of great minds are here, so let's get with the solution as well.
Stock exchange. Changes the way stock exchange do business. It means I'm not really concerned about the middle class blacks now who are very bright and, as you said, come and do things. No, it's these guys here who have magnificent ideas for at this level that need what? Funding. They need money. All right? So, if at this resolution, business plan, everything is ready to go, and in fact, I'm ashamed to admit this, but some cities upstate, as you all know, some of you all know, try to get us to come up there and establish this stock exchange up there. Because everything we want, like everything. You guys go to the bathroom and analyze that. See what they can. Well, I'm sorry, I see what they can put out, but I'm just making the point. So what I'm proposing, I started to give the concept over to the group here, a startup stock exchange, which is funded by poor people, which is money for new and bright ideas and new businesses to go forward, while those businesses have to reciprocate to the poor people. You understand what I mean on a regular basis? You get the balance there? It's not like the old-fashioned stock exchange where you just make money in the pocket. It means that if he comes up with a decent idea, people who want to invest in it have the right to invest. And part of his investment strategy is that you have to refund some of the money so that people have money to eat, sleep, and all that. I would suggest we work in children out of the, as they say, off the box, and move this forward so that we can fund our own without the beg and whine and beg people to do it. All right? Thank you.
The security is letting us know that the time is nearing. We are here until 6 p.m. But I just have one quick question as well for the scholars and our brothers and sisters. As an African born in the diaspora, how do we merge our ideas and concepts with the Africans born on the continent and the Africans born here? Because what we realize, if you just look at all the sisters here who are here, we're born here, and we are in our African tradition of what we know it is. But we have our African brothers from the continent, they come here, they throw away their history, their culture, their tradition to pick up the Western culture, whereby we here, who have been fighting to go home, we picking up our African culture here to return home. So how can we begin to bridge our ideas together? You cannot be in America and not talk about Pan-Africanism, when Pan-Africanism is what let the continent free to allow our peoples to come out of the continent and move freely around the world. So how can we, what is the solution we can do to merge our ideas and concepts together when we're talking about moving together in a common mission? Thank you.
Second part of our solution.
An idea that just came to me is that this is my first time an event regarding Africa where I see an African American brother. I think how we bring together is when you have even conference like this, we should invite them more and invite African intellectuals and stay together. I'm very glad, most of us are from the whole. I'm very glad that it's African American brother. Next time will be 3 or 4 of them.
Yes, the sisters over there from the security letting us know we got to get out here by 6 o'clock. Can we convene someplace else?
I would recommend those people who organized this conference, the African Unity of Harlem, take the responsibility to bring few resourceful individuals, discuss thoroughly on the priorities of our needs. I mean, we cannot jump all what we are talking now. So they will make some priorities. Which one comes first? Which one comes second? Then it will be good if we let them, if we give them the opportunity to guide us, to form a committee, to invite resourceful persons, set the priorities, and move forward.
Thank you very much. African Unity, we have school every Fridays. Very important. We forget one issue. I think we don't speak the issue Chinese involved in Africa. Between the Chinese European is very important to discuss in African world. It's very important. So I think we are here to create in the committee is very important. It's just 106 in Amsterdam, 106 in Amsterdam. They have Ethiopian restaurant house. I think this is very important. Since we are here, we have to make everything we can talk, but we don't have the structures. We don't have to implement. We have to start to implement first to talk about the whole things. So, thank you very much. No matter, you don't have no many people, but it is the most important is the issue discussed.